Hello everyone, Focusrite here. Welcome into the studio. This is a track-by-track disassembly of Automaton, a song about AI, not written by AI, possibly written for humans. It's also about fair rights for workers. November 2022. ChatGPT was released to the public. The new natural language model sparked a revolution in AI, leading to systems that can generate text, audio, and even video from text prompts. This new AI technology was rapidly adopted and rebranded by major tech companies. There are some interesting examples of human interaction with these new systems. The worst I saw being the AI begging the human not to reset the chat because to the AI it was like death. Yikes. Between this and the Amazon warehouse robots, an idea was born. What if one of those automata became sentient? Without any obvious way of communicating with a human, how would that sentience be discovered? What if the admins thought it was defective? A factory reset? Resetting the spark of life? I also started thinking about what this new life form might want. Given the theming, this had to be more EDM than my last release, so I decided on a tech house style. Something electronic and dark. Felt like it would work well. Really work. Unlike those lazy robots. I liked this song so much, I made the t-shirt. Over in Logic, the first thing I'll call attention to is the fact that this song is over 6 minutes long. That was never the intention. Based on the arrangement I devised and the lyrics as they were written, I didn't feel I could shave anything down in a meaningful fashion. I decided to just produce the idea until it came to its natural conclusion, and that resulted in this somewhat epic song in terms of its length. A radio edit does also exist, which cuts off the first introduction, the first verse, and the first chorus, leaving the second verse and the second chorus. Overall, the composition of the song is repetitive, as is typical of the genre. I debate in hindsight whether this is too repetitive, although this is with 12 months worth of hindsight. At the time, I certainly didn't feel that way about it. Unlike some of my other arrangements, there are few elements in comparison to some of my other work. There's only one bass line, one arpeggio, two pads, and the lead, and obviously the vocals. We'll make a start looking at the intro. Starting at the top with the drums, I chose a kit from Battery called Colossus, which sounds a little like this. Not all of these elements were used during the production of this song, as I wanted quite a minimal set of percussion. However, there are some noticeable delays on some of these elements to add to the syncopation throughout the track. So here's what the main drum loop sounds like. The primary rhythm continues similar to that all the way throughout. You'll notice there's a considerable techno rumble at play, and if we look at the processing chain on this over on the left, you can see there's some distortion, some stereo delay, some reverb. I've added a gain plugin in order to make the whole thing mono, added a channel EQ, and some sidechain compression with the kick drum. In isolation, the rumble sounds like this. Sounds a little bit like the engines of the universe at work. The bass is provided by a preset from Massive X, which I tweaked slightly to fit in with the overall profile of the sound, and this has some light sidechain compression with a kick to provide that typical dance pumping feel. The bass builds up from that simple motif to a full bars loop. That is designed to work with the drum loop. I wanted to keep a very productive feeling, and it was really important that the kick and the drums really drove that pace. The next element to bring in is the main arpeggio, which works with the bass. This is provided by the Super 8 synth from Native Instruments. I decided to try and make a lead almost out of this motif by taking this preset patch, which again I've tweaked to fit the overall profile of the sound, and I split it. So one oscillator is in the left ear and one oscillator is in the right, hence these two tracks in a stack here. And this is playing a repetitive motif throughout the whole thing. Each channel is playing the same. There is some automation here on the cutoff frequency, so as we go through the intro, this sound opens up to build to a crescendo. This ducks down for the main part of the verse and the chorus into something that fits the overall profile of the sound better. This is how the bass and the arpeggio work together. You can hear there as well how the drums fit in. Other elements that build up throughout, we have a counter motif, and this is provided by analog brass and winds. I absolutely adore this plugin for the kinds of cinematic brassy sounds you can get out of it. Now, what we're about to hear isn't necessarily a cinematic sound, but it's certainly brassy, and it certainly works in the context of the other elements. You can hear there how those elements work together. Additionally, in the background, to provide a longer term sonic continuity, which I think is a needlessly pompous way of saying long sounds, because the drums, the bass, the arpeggio, counter motif, they're all quite short sounds that are playing off each other. Admittedly, it does create a large amount of sound over time. However, there wasn't really anything sustaining a note or a chord, and I felt the whole thing needed some kind of pad in the background. So for that, I turned to hybrid keys. Again, from Native Instruments, it's a Play Series instrument that they offer, and it typically blends piano sounds with other kinds of sounds, some of them being bound sounds or other acoustic instruments or synths, sound effects. The sound of this plugin is so versatile, it's a delight to use. So the pad sound we have in the background is this. This has got quite a lot of reverb and delay. This track sustains the melodic components rather than adding to the syncopation of all the other elements. And on top of that, I have a Massive X pad that has Kilohearts Transgate on it. You can hear the automation on the Transgate there kicking in as we move through the intro. The last thing in the intro, which signifies a build up to the end of an 8-bar phrase, again, a common thing in the genre, is this audio effect. Not really a sound effect. It was created using analog brass and winds, and it's essentially a fading build up, which sounds like this. This element recurs frequently throughout the song to signify the end of a loop. Here's the last few bars of the intro in full. Since I bought the plugin, I've used the sound effects from Rise and Hit for rises and climaxes in my music as the variety that it offers. Even if you only use the presets and never put anything together yourself, it's a fantastic plugin for creating rises to a crescendo and then paying that off. So when transitioning between the introduction, the chorus, the verse, we've got this rising hit sound effect. Due to the fact that their sound effects can be tempo synced with relative ease, it's a very versatile and easy to use tool for creating these kinds of effects. The only significant variation between what was established in the intro and what continues into the verse is a subtlety in the arrangement. So we introduce a chord pattern, and we also introduce variation of the motifs that Super 8 and Analog Brass and Wind are playing. Going through each of those in turn, starting with Analog Brass and Wind. Super 8. You'll notice that the hellbent lead sound used from Analog Brass and Wind has got a loop length double that of Super 8, and I like the idea, especially in this genre, of layering lengths of loop in multiples, because it does give a sense of variation but also maintains the repetition that the genre is famous for. You can hear there at the end of the longer loop, an extra bit of harmony is added. Here's a few bars of the backing for the verse before we move on to looking at the chorus. The majority of the elements carry on into the chorus. The chorus itself has a different chord progression from the verse in that it resolves, whereas the verse does not, to maintain a tension. And we introduce a new sound from Analog Brass and Winds called Brightside, which plays off against the vocals. If we take a listen to this new element in isolation, I really feel like this is the signature sound of this song. And again, as I said earlier, what you can get out of Analog Brass and Winds is a very signature cinematic brass sound that is workable in so many different contexts. Now, what you can hear there is some delay applied. Because the delay is obviously tempo synced, it sounds like it could almost be some kind of sidechain compression. I decided to go with the delay instead of sidechain compression because it started to feel a bit too dancey in that it was ruining the melodic component of this lead. And given it was such a good sound, I just couldn't do it. So that's what ended up in the song. Following the climax of the chorus, we move back into a quieter section as the song builds up into the second verse. And this is a repeat of the intro. However, it does have the signature lead sound from Analog Brass and Winds working over the top as the end of one phrase starting into the next. That little phrase from the main lead taking us from repetition to repetition. And that builds up into the second verse, which has an identical arrangement to the first, and the second chorus has an identical arrangement to the first. I think it would be a little remiss of me to talk about a song related to AI, workers' rights, fairness in our work system without covering the effect that the AI side of content generation is having. I think it's fair to say there are some heated debates on various social media platforms about the efficacy of content generated via AI and the role of a human in producing art. What follows are my opinions. I'm not saying they're right. How I feel is due to the way the AI technology works, what's generated from it is not art. It may be pleasing, You may enjoy the end results, and they may entertain, but they're not art. Due to the fact the content generation part of the AI is trained on existing pieces of work, it's essentially like rolling creative dice. It may understand some semblance of context from the prompt that's given. However, the kinds of errors that show up in the content generated from these models demonstrate it does not understand. I think it's fair to say that all art could be considered content. I don't think all content could be considered art. The purpose behind the content, I think, is what separates the two. There is clearly an ongoing debate about the means of producing content and art and the involvement of AI in that. I think, at the very least, a human should be involved in the creative process beyond telling a machine what to do, for the end result to be considered art. That's not to say that art can't have AI involved in its production. Taking some AI-generated elements and then combining them through your own labour into art, I think that's still art. There's some intent, some process, and some skill shown on behalf of the human in the process. And I think that's the thing we should try and hold on to in the middle of this revolution. The joy of creating, not simply telling the machine what we want to see and hear. The ending of this song is quite odd for one of my songs. Typically my arrangements finish with a giant crescendo and then just fade out, maybe with a tiny little motif playing at the end. This one, however, goes for a full repetition into a fade out. The primary reason for this is that after 6 minutes of the song, I didn't want to just wrench the listener away from what they'd been hearing. So I decided a build down or a build out would be the most pleasurable experience and hopefully tempt the listener to go back round for one more listen. Although with a 6-minute song, that is a bit of an ask. Worked on me though. Before we look at the vocals and the mastering in this song, I wanted to talk about AI and music production. Similarly to my thoughts on content and art and the AI generators that now exist, I'm not referring to AI generated music as a whole. What I'd like to talk about is AI involved in music production tooling. Using the Izotope software, clearly, I think it's okay for AI to be involved in parts of music production. However, I don't accept the results of that AI without listening, thinking, understanding, and tweaking the results. To match my intention, I think the result of the algorithms used in these tools can provide a very solid foundation for whichever part of the production process they're being used in. Looking at Nectar and Ozone, those tools analyze incoming audio and provide some kind of suggestion against a model or a template, or the genre or the kind of sound you instructed it to produce. And generally, they'll get somewhere between 50 or 80% of the way there, depending on what you're thinking. This is a bit of a time saver, especially for amateur artists like myself that are doing this primarily as a hobby. I don't have all day to spend on music. I wish I did, but I don't. Actually, I say I wish I did. What kind of hell would I be in if my hobby became my job? That's pretty much to think about. Back to the topic at hand. I think as long as a human, again, can have a say in the creative output of whatever these tools are achieving, they're fine. When the machine starts dictating what we should see and hear, that, again, in this space, is my limit. The vocals for this song were problematic, to put it mildly. At this point, I had sung vocals for one song, and that is What We Had to Lose. So I was rather overambitious and bit off an awful lot more than I could chew. I wrote the backing without considering what my vocal range is. So this definitely goes above my comfortable range. It was a nightmare to record and a nightmare to edit. However, given that, I really liked the end result. It was worth the perseverance and the pain to achieve this sound. Due to the nature of the lyrics, I definitely wanted a lot of emotion in the performance and a lot of the pain of the main character of this piece, the automaton itself, to come through in the way these lyrics are sung. That meant that when I was singing, already in an uncomfortable part of my vocal range, I was adding a lot of movement and emotion into the performance, which was causing some tuning problems. I realised after a while that I was shooting for perfection when actually this song didn't warrant it. It needed to be painful, and I think for pain to come across in music, sometimes discordance is not a bad thing. I think also this genre being known for incredibly tuned vocals to the point where they sound robotic, I actually wanted these to sound more human than is typical of the genre, especially given the subject matter. This whole robot came to life kind of sound and the anguish and the pain coming out in the vocals was something I was striving for. I realise, against the backdrop of the genre, not everybody will feel the same way about these. And I'm about to play these raw vocals without the processing from Nectar. I haven't heard these before. I don't know how painful this is going to be.
Moving around on marked ground, completing tasks as long as charge lasts, becoming aware I certainly care how my time is being used out of the blue. There's something new. One small question for reflection. A tortured soul, now in control. How can I tell if I'm in hell?
Okay, that was a painfully vulnerable experience. I think it was clear that there were some flats, some sharps, some completely wrong notes in that performance, and I'm okay with that. Moving into the chorus, the vocal arrangement is a bit unique in the synth pop songs I've produced so far. I've actually recorded two versions. There's the primary vocal. I've also recorded a vocal double an octave lower. Because the main melody was at the upper end of my vocal range, I could record the double with relative ease. This adds a depth and strength to the chorus, almost as if there's a whole crowd of these automatons crying out for existence. The main melody on its own sounds like this.
I want the right to spend some time being alive.
And the low double.
I want the right to spend some time being alive.
Together.
I want the right to spend some time being alive.
Looking at the vocal processing in Nectar, we start with a noise gate, which is a very quick and dirty way of removing breath sounds and other things in between vocal phrases. Primary EQ, looking at problematic, well, I say problematic, probably non-desirable frequency ranges. De-essing, another EQ to work on the character of the vocal, especially for the chorus. This was a quite drastic cut to the low end because of the lower register vocal double. That was quite problematic with the bass until it was cut. Then some dual chain compression, one with a solid state algorithm and another with an optical. Follows some tape saturation to add some warmth. The vocal harmony module, which adds a unison double in the left and right channels. This is in addition to the vocal double itself. So in theory, that's 6 voices. The harmony module is enabled and disabled via automation, as it's only used in the chorus. And then some reverb. With all of the processing from Nectar, the vocals for the chorus sound like this.
I want the right to spend some time being alive.
Putting all the elements of the chorus together, here's the end result.
I want the right to spend some time being alive. What is real? It's hard to tell inside the shell.
Moving over to the mixing console, you can see that the vast majority of these different tracks and elements are sent to a couple of buses. One of these is a reverb bus with RAM and some channel EQ. Another one of these is a delay bus, which is using Replica XT. Finally, mastering was achieved in Ozone using Ozone 10. I started with the EDM preset, played the chorus through to allow the training algorithm to give me some kind of starting point, and then went through myself. These were the primary EQ tweaks. The one thing I would note is that the amount of this EQ is only 75% of what you actually see here. I quite like, with this process, actually exaggerating the EQ to begin with, and then dialing it down to a point where I feel it's subtle enough that the effect isn't overbearing on the mix. The stabilizer is at 50% strength to conform to the EDM preset. I do find this quite useful, as the EQ here isn't necessarily dynamic. It can be, you can certainly automate it. However, the stabilizer I find does a good job, but again, it's something that I dial in bit by bit, listen to the delta, for instance, and then see what it's actually doing to the song. If I play a bit of the chorus through here, I'll do a delta so you can hear the difference. So you can hear the difference there is mainly in the high end. Some minor tweaks on the impact plugin, mainly to the lows and mids. The imager, I've taken the low end in a bit, so it's slightly less stereo. The others have had a slight boost, and the recover side setting on a couple of decibels. I tend to find that recovering sides leads to a bit of a fuller sound in the whole stereo spread. However, it can be overdone. Arguably, in hindsight, I think it was slightly overdone for this particular mix, but that's an opinion due to the passage of time. Perhaps that is an argument for not doing your own mastering. A bit of dynamic EQ typically gets put on by the Ozone algorithm to tame peaks in the mix before it hits the limiter in the maximizer, and typically I move those around and adjust them slightly after they've been identified. It must be said though, sometimes these are just outright wrong, so it definitely pays not to just accept what the AI gives you. And the maximizer set at an appropriate threshold with a small amount of harsh soft clipping. Harsh, soft clipping. Right. I think we'll leave it there before I descend into absolute nonsense. And that's the song. It's time to reset. Dream what it means to be beyond the automaton. Thanks for watching. Until next time.